Hello and welcome to the 45th episode of Old Romans Unscripted. Hello, Father Tom.
Hello.
Welcome. Obviously, things are a little colder now in Chicago.
A little bit.
What's the outside temperature?
16 degrees Fahrenheit.
I have no idea what that means. I assume that's very cold. A big happy birthday. We've got a birthday boy watching. Happy birthday to Colin, who is one of my parishioners' sons. Barbara, happy birthday to you. Of course, it was my birthday on Thursday.
Happy belated birthday, Your Grace.
Bless you. Thank you very much. And thank you to all those who wish me happy birthday. Several messages via email and Facebook and everything else. Really quite incredible. And what I thought was amazing and was very moving, very touching, was the parish of Jesus the Divine Mercy in the Philippines, who I was with this time last year. They held a birthday party in my honour, in absentia, complete with a birthday cake and all the things that I enjoyed eating when I was with them last year. So they had a little birthday party for me in my absence, admittedly, but nonetheless they held one for me after Mass with Bishop Joash, who of course this week was celebrating his first anniversary of episcopal consecration. So ad multos annos to Bishop Joash. You can read more about the celebrations in this week's The Old Roman, which should come out before Sunday begins here in the UK, hopefully. It's almost finished. So there we go. So tomorrow, of course, is Sexagesima Sunday. So the second Sunday, the middle Sunday of the season of Gesima. Sexagesima, of course, coming from the word in Latin for 60th, referring to times past when Lent began when Lent was 60 days. Last week, of course, remember, was Septuagesima, which spoke to an even earlier time when 70 days of Lent were observed, and then after this week, of course, will be Quinquagesima, again referring to a time when 50 days of Lent were observed. And then, of course, we'll have Ash Wednesday and the usual Quadragesima, 40 days of Lent that most of us are now used to. Of course, the Gesima season, as we reflected last week, is an opportunity to consider what it is you're going to observe come this Lenten disciplines. Particularly, of course, Gesima is a time for analysing one's spiritual life and condition, and asking yourself, what am I failing in? What am I doing that I shouldn't be doing? What do I find difficult? Perhaps I find it difficult to pray, or I find certain prayers difficult, or I find it certain parts of the Mass I find that I drift off during. Whatever it is, it may be about your Christian life generally. Am I not as good a Christian as I ought to be? Am I not as charitable as I ought to be? Am I not as generous as I ought to be? Am I not as merciful as I ought to be toward others? All these sorts of things we should be reflecting on during Gesima, so that we can then recognise what it is we need to address in Lent, and then we can tailor our Lenten observance and our Lenten discipline accordingly. So before I bring Bishop Kelly on, he's just popped up in the green room there, and he's, of course, Father Tom's local superior. So just before we bring him on, how's your Gesima going, Father Tom? And have you analysed anything that you particularly will need to address in Lent, or identified a particular Lenten discipline that you will need to employ?
It's going well. It's busy with Actually, I've been doing a lot of church files, going through a lot of our old records from the missions, and dealing with all that past couple weeks. I'm kind of planning on maybe this week or after Quinta Majestima, really buckling down on Lent and figuring that all out, because obviously next week I have a birthday and I will be home with my mom for that.
Excellent.
So I'll be up in Michigan again next week. So kind of just enjoying a little bit more time, maybe procrastinating, if you will, before getting into Lent. Probably try to do the black fast again. I'm debating on that.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that this year.
There's a lot of other stuff going on with my secular job. So weighing all that in and doing some more prayer discerning on that before I make a more
definite
tying
resolution.
up those loose ends. Yeah. So we'll see. I still got a couple weeks to go, so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've been thinking about the Black Fast for this year as well. For those who, it has a modern, contemporary, trendy equivalent term, which is intermittent fasting. I read up the other day about intermittent fasting and realised that basically it's a black fast. So it's basically fasting all day till about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and after that point, at some point later, before the end of the day, having a meal. But of course, the difference being for Lent and for a black fast, obviously you would not have dairy, you would not have meat in that meal, whatever it was. But intermittent fasting is proven by health officials to be really good. And of course, which just betrays the ancient origins of fasting itself. Many of these things were done because they did do good if one observed them. Okay, let's bring on Bishop Kelly. Hello, Bishop Kelly. How are you?
Hello. How are we doing?
We're good. So, how's your Jessima going? Have you identified anything yet that you need to address, or identified a relevant Lenten discipline you'll take up to address it?
Not quite yet. As a sort of a penitential discipline, I do think, though, at this stage, I might delve into. It's been a long time since I've read John of the Cross and Therese of Avila, so I think I might take a delve back into those works throughout the Lenten period. As they say at home, it would do me the power of good.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, that's something we could talk about. Is Lectio Modena, which is the reading of spiritual treatises. It's a common practice during Lent. Particular titles, as Bishop Kelly mentioned, particular authors like St. John of the Cross, Therese of Avila, St. Francis de Sales, St. Francis Xavier, St. Ignatius of Loyola, Thomas à Kempis, and various titles ranging from the Imitation of Christ through to the City of God, the Dark Night of the Soul, what's that? The Heavenly Ladder, I think, is another one.
Interior Castle.
Interior Castle. The Devout Life. All these are excellent tomes that really one can be dipping in and out of all the time. I always keep upon me wherever I am. I have a lovely tiny pocket edition of the Imitation of Christ by Thomas à Kempis, which I always keep on my person. If I do find myself on the bus, for example, twiddling my thumbs, then I'll get that out and read a chapter. because the chapters are literally a page and a half long, and end with a prayer, and it's a good way to spend a quick couple of minutes. Father Tom, of course, would advocate praying the Rosary as well, if we were, and Bishop Kelly would tell us to twiddle our thumbs whilst doing it.
That's why we have
But actually, of that genre of Lectio Modena, what particular books have either of you found particularly helpful? Bearing in mind, of course, that as worker priests, your manner of life is very similar to the majority of lay people, in the sense that you have secular occupations, because that's often something, isn't it, that people say, oh well, I haven't got all day to pray and read like you have, Father. Well, actually neither have Father Tom and Bishop Kelly, so listen up, because because they make the time, which of course we all should be doing for God. So, sorry, going back to the question, anyone, what particular book have you found useful?
Just in the vein that you said, I mean, people don't have time, and it's true. But often people, or at least used to, will settle down in the evening after work, put their feet up, have a cup of tea or a glass of wine, and will delve into a good book. And one of the most accessible books, and it's a good read because it reads rather well, is The Story of a Soul by Therese of Lazier. There's a narrative there. There's something that wants you to turn the page to see what happens next. It's filled with spirituality, a spiritual journal. It's deep with spiritual insights and a personal struggle. It's a really good one. If you feel you don't have time to get into these more heady things that require sitting down, perhaps best read at a desk in silence, some of these things. But if you want to put your feet up, pick up a book with a cup of tea, coffee, or a cocoa, or a glass of wine, and read something interesting and spiritually enriching, I recommend Story of a Soul by Therese of Lazier. In fact, it was the very first religious book that I read.
Excellent.
I mean,
Father Tom.
Bible, of course.
Oh, you read the Bible before the Catechism?
Well, I wouldn't call that a book. It's not something. Yeah. It's more of a textbook, I would think.
Father Tom.
I mean, Bishop Kelly probably he took my answer. Story of the Soul is a great book. It's light reading, in a sense. Like Bishop Kelly said, you can kick your feet up, have a nice beverage, and read it. And as a worker priest, I find that actually relates more to my secular life than my religious life. I find more similarities in my day-to-day interactions as in my secular profession than I would in my religious profession, which is very powerful, because you can often forget that being a worker priest. You're a priest first, of course, but you also interact with the world in the way the world doesn't see you as a priest. So remembering those temperances, remembering those difficulties that is brought out in that book, it gives you that reassurance, awakening, if you will, on how to go through your day-to-day life. And you don't need to be a religious to do it.
Cool. And of course, what's interesting about that is that St. Therese was a religious who wrote it.
and didn't go beyond the walls of her cloister.
No, she stayed in the Carmel. That was her life. But of course, she was a great pen pal she was a great correspondent with a lot of, particularly priests in the missions. So that gave her an insight and a worldview that ordinarily she wouldn't experience being in the Carmel all the time. So that certainly I think influences some of her writing. She has that, but as well, of course, because she was very young, but she was blessed with a mature soul and with a mature spirituality that was able to take what she was, told by her missionary correspondents, and able to process it and still understand it and still think how to approach and to apply things spiritually, even though this was out of the realm of her own lived experience of spiritual life. So she was, one of the signs of her being a saint, I would say, is that deep sense of mature spirituality, but which, of course, expressed in a very simple way that some even might say, mistakenly, I think some people would say even naive, but it's not. It's just very simple and straightforward.
Yeah, and also towards the beginning of the book, if you want to see, and of course it's different time, different era, different country, different culture, but if you want an example of Catholic family life, it's a wonderful description. And of course, the parents of Therese have been, their cause
Saints.
has been promoted, and so it's. But if you look at that, if you look how the parents nurture their children, look at the encouragement, even though there's a sense of pain and there's a sort of tension between pain and delightment when the daughters enter Carmel, the sense of loss, but knowing that they're going to. I think it's a wonderful exposure of. Whereas Catholic family life has nourished vocations. I mean, I could say for myself, Catholic family life, or lukewarm or lapsed Catholic family life, discouraged my vocation actively and bluntly. But here you have, a wonderful. You can say, and you can also, if you ever read the biography of Marcel Lefebvre, you can see his family life, which would be in the same sort of vein.
Yeah.
That French Catholic life also encouraged that. I think whether himself, he has a sister, a nun, and maybe two brothers, a priest. Anyway, that was encouraged, and it was the fruit of a good Catholic, a prayerful upbringing. So it's very rich in many, many ways, and it's very readable, very readable. And of course, I mean, another any of the biographies of G.K. Chesterton is another readable thing for to keep your interest and give you sort of a spiritual understanding as to some of the great saints, especially of the medieval church. Would also be a thing. You don't want something that you'll start and you'll put down because it's too dry. You don't have really the time to give concentration to or serious thought and study. But if you're busy and you want something to relax to read that's spiritual and wholesome, there's a few books there that you can start at the basics there with those.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, like we said, things like The Devout Life by Francis de Sales. He, of course, again, was writing specifically for people who were living in the world, but who wanted to deepen their spirituality and their commitment to Christ and their pursuit of holiness. It's worth perhaps looking around for some more contemporary translations of some of these works. If you're not terribly au fait with thee and thou and thy and thine and that old-fashioned sort of language, then certainly I would say don't attempt it. Look for a contemporary translation because it'll be easier to read, and you'll find it easier then to take in the advice and the insight that's being given. And then, of course, spiritual exercises as well, like those of St. Ignatius and others. And, of course, Father Tom, novenas, because there are various feasts during Lent that will have novenas attached to them. Is there a novena to St. Patrick, Bishop Kelly?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm sure one exists.
Yeah.
Because he's so, Patrick's so old, it sort of predates the apart from the original novena, of course, but this flourishing of other novenas as a devotion, I'm really not aware of the. But of course, Saint Joseph does have a novena, and
yes, Joseph.
He pops up in Lent.
Yeah.
And but even if there is, I mean, there has to be something out there. But even if there isn't, start one. Say the Rosary for 9 days, and whatever intention it is, ask His intercession. There you are, instant novena.
I mean,
speaking of Irishmen, even though Patrick wasn't.
No, he was Welsh.
He was Welsh, yes. Thank you for him.
Diolch yn fawr.
Although
Croeso.
Tomorrow will be interesting when in the rugby when Ireland play Wales. We'll see what happens there.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Scotland over England, I have to say.
I know. Yeah, brilliant.
Oh yeah, I bet the English are pretty sore about that today. Anyway, if you want, especially, perhaps not, although interesting for lay people, but perhaps for religious and priests, you might take a look at the works by Columba Marmion.
Oh yes.
Christ, the ideal of the priest, Christ, the ideal of the monk, etc.
Yeah.
They are fantastic, and they are really a collection of conferences, weekly conferences that he gave to his monks as abbot of Maritzu in Belgium.
That's right. Yeah, they're superb.
Yeah, they really are fantastic. When I was going through my diaconate and priesthood, I used those in my retreat beforehand. I would read certain sections in my silent retreat before those. I can't speak highly enough. If you haven't discovered them, and they're widely available.
Yeah.
And I think Ignatius Press here in the United States have them, and they really are fantastically rich. And actually, Columba Marmion, I forget his worldly name, but he was a secular priest of the Archdiocese of Dublin originally, and he was chaplain to Kilmainham Jail, Father Tom. So he worked in. Is Father Tom hearing us?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so he worked in a jail as a chaplain, and then discovered a religious calling to Benedictine life. And of course, at that stage, since the Reformation, there were no Benedictines in Ireland, only Cistercians. And he went to Maritzu in Belgium, and even if all of that is above you, you can enjoy Maritzu beer here in the United States. Maybe that's the gateway drug to the conferences of Columba Marmion.
Well, yeah. Well, you'd have to start drinking those now, of course, in Decima, because you won't be able to drink them in Lent. So Yeah, as always. Yeah. Any other recommendations?
For Jessamotide, is that what you're
Well,
asking?
for spiritual reading.
Spiritual reading. I think I've covered both the. I think we covered most of it. I can't think of anything that immediately comes to mind. I mean, I would, as much as I love them, I would stay away from. Well, no, I'll leave that thought. Park that. Well, I was going to say I would stay away from things that are contemporary and sensationalist, as good as they
Oh,
go.
yeah.
Something like Infiltration by Taylor Marcer.
Oh,
Read,
that's that. Yeah.
read it. It's interesting. Make your own.
No. We're talking about spiritual literature.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They are religious. So I would say don't confuse that with spiritual literature.
Oh, yeah.
Stay away from that sort of stuff. You can't go wrong with the classics. You really can't. Yeah, I mean, even if you want to reread things like Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, and read them, I mean, perhaps you've read them as a child or an adolescent, you might want to reread those through a mature Christian that you've become, and that can be quite beneficial, because I did that a number of years ago, and I saw a lot of things that, of course, flew over my head when I was younger. So that might be something you might want to do.
Yes, if you don't want something, if you can't, if you don't want something sort of overtly, deeply spiritual, and you want a little bit of escapism, but at the same time reading with the eyes of faith, you do get a whole other perspective. You get two levels. You get both the story, but also you get the theological inferences and spiritual meanings and insights into things. Absolutely. That's a great one. Anything in the news this week that caught your attention? Nothing, Father Tom?
Nothing that's appropriate for this show.
Oh, okay.
Well, I'm surprised. I'm really surprised, Father. You didn't come up with if you don't believe in Vatican II the way we present it to you, you're not in. Pope Francis.
Yes, so this was Pope Francis last Monday, who announced that Vatican II is the magisterium. Vatican II expresses the mind of the magisterium of the contemporary church, and if you're not with that, then you're not with us. Is more or less what he said. Which, of course, from our perspective is, tell us something we don't know. But it's also kind of like, that's the own goal, isn't it? That's what we've been saying. Because, of course, the council is not necessarily expressive of the magisterium of the church. So Francis has constrained everything to only Vatican II, and of course, well, I was just going to say, we've seen the fruits. We've seen the fruits of that.
Yes, plenty of fruits. It's ridiculous. I mean, for a council that didn't pronounce any anathemas, Francis has made it into an anathema, almost. He's basically. Go on.
Wouldn't the Vatican II Council be an anathema against the faith? Like,
traditionally, councils,
no, but wouldn't it be an anathema of like anathema sit? Vatican II Council would be anathema sit against the faith.
Well,
perhaps you could. Yeah.
Well, no. See, the only thing I'd say about that is that the conciliar documents, most of the conciliar documents, are so ambiguously written that it is not so easy to necessarily, if one had to and was in the position of deciding whether or not Vatican II was reflective of the universal magisterium of the universal church, you'd have to tread carefully. I mean, there are some obvious points which are contrary to the received faith and tradition and praxis of the church, but that's one of the curious things about Vatican II is this ambiguity in its language, and which of course has for so many years created this atmosphere of uncertainty, because on the one hand, for a while, people thought maybe there was a particular mindset of the conciliar fathers at the time, and that was opposed to or distinct from the subsequent mindset that developed post the council, and was expressed in its supposed implementation. Because there does seem to be a kind of disconnect. If you read Sacrosanctum Concilium on the liturgy, for example, what was developed by Bunini and imposed by Paul VI is in stark contrast to what was expressed as the conciliar mind of the bishops at the council. Mm-hmm. So for that reason, in terms of Sacrosanctum Concilium, there is nothing in Sacrosanctum Concilium which is opposed to tradition. It introduces the notion of perhaps, well, actually, I mean, you couldn't really call them novelties in the great schema of liturgical development. The idea, for example, of having some vernacular, that's not a nuclear bomb to tradition in terms of liturgy, and of course the conciliar fathers advocated the retention, basically, of Latin and of the Gregorian chant. They wanted to ensure the sacredness of music, that it was appropriate for the liturgy still, even if modern composers or whatever were used, but it still had to be basically in tone and in sympathy with tradition and what had gone on before. The disconnect is what happened after the council and what was introduced and imposed in the liturgical changes, which were really quite drastic and revolutionary, and almost the antithesis of what the conciliar document and mind was expressed in Sacrosanctum Concilium. So that's for instance. I mean, there are other more obvious things that are Nostra Aetate, for example, that is particularly difficult to reconcile with tradition, particularly with regard to the status and relationship and regard given to other faiths, putting more or less, putting the Abrahamic faiths, for example, on a par with each other. almost to relativize or denigrate Christology and indeed Trinitarian theology and dogma concerning the unicity of the triune Godhead. So that Nostra Aetate is that is particularly difficult. But the other issue is, of course, is that none of these documents, though, were made dogma. I mean, they weren't really even given any kind of particular heavy weight doctrinally.
No.
They were almost just discussion documents, really.
Paul VI himself said, I want this to be considered as a pastoral council. There's no assent of faith in a pastoral council. The church worldwide has to assent to that. And
I mean, council really. I mean, I think that the real question is was it a council, or was it a synod?
Yeah. There is that debate.
Because what really makes it a council?
Well, what makes it a council in popular belief is the title that was given.
Well, yeah, yeah, but that's about it.
That's about it. But now it has ascended to this, to the statement this week of if you're not in it, you're not with us, And there's nothing to say that you had to assent to that. And another point too that the people perhaps are not as well read in, that they think the whole objection about Lefebvre was about liturgy. I think he was quite happy with Sacrosanctum Concilium. He wouldn't have had a problem as it was written at the council. His problem was with Nostra Aetate. As a missionary who spent his life
exactly
trying to and that's where he lost connect with it, and rightly so.
I mean, Lefebvre was no great liturgist.
Oh God,
he wasn't he wasn't particularly interested in the liturgy. He wasn't a liturgist.
You can see that with
you can see that with the bizarre customs that they use that they employ liturgic. I mean, their use, for example, of the pontifical throne for bishops without claiming any ordinary any ordinary jurisdiction, who should properly be speaking using fold stalls in the traditional rite. There are other things that are obviously accommodations that have been made because of the missionary status of the society, but it is odd, that there are odd things about it. But I mean, Lefebvre was quite happy with the 65 Missale, the so-called interim temporary missal, which was part vernacular, part Latin, was basically the traditional form of Mass, with just those one or two changes. In fact, part of the problem for the society internally later on in the 70s and 80s was a push by many of the seminarians to a more traditional version of the Missale, going back to pre-concilia. And an accommodation, he finally settled on the 62 edition, which forced some to leave and create the Society of St. Pius V, because they wanted to go back to pre-55. So yeah, I mean, Lefebvre, yes, many people think that the society exists because of liturgy, but it doesn't. It was a doctrinal stance, manifestly, that Lefebvre was taking.
It certainly was initially, but I think when Lefebvre saw Bugnini's missal, he was aghast.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, they all were.
Yeah,
I mean, they all were. I'm trying to remember the Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster at the time, writing
Would that have been Heenan at the time?
Yeah, Heenan, and wasn't he? And I think he was writing to Evelyn Waugh, or was it to Agatha Christie? One of those. But they were shown the new mass in Rome. There was like they did like a kind of mock-up for the benefit of the cardinals, and Heaton was horrified. Couldn't believe what he was seeing, what he saw, but of course he died before it was implemented. But
yeah, I think it must have been even war. The interesting thing is Agatha Christie, that the English got a special indult for the old.
That's right, the Agatha Christie indult. Yeah.
Because Agatha Christie either wrote to the Pope or somebody wrote to the Pope mentioning.
It was Heenan. It was Heenan. It was Heenan who did that. Yeah.
And the Pope recognized Agatha Christie and thought, oh, okay. The little princess, mon ami.
Yeah. But it's like anything like that. It's all sort of it's not our circus anymore, really. Somebody's just pointed out in the comments, of course, the news today. Pope Francis appointing a woman with the right to vote as Under Secretary of the Synod of Bishops.
Well, that's against canon law, but I guess he can change canon law at a whim. But what's more worrying is she's part of a congregation, a Jesuit-inspired congregation.
Yes, that's Saviorettes or Savioristas or something.
Something like that, but they're Ignatian in spirituality. And she looks more like an EU or UN ambassador than a religious sister. And there's also a Spanish priest has been appointed.
Yeah.
I think he's an Augustinian.
Yeah.
And we all know the caliber that the Augustinians produce. Sorry, Augustinians, you're not all responsible for the Reformation, just one of you.
For those of you who don't know, Luther was an Augustinian canon. Yes, indeed. But also it's a kind of something and nothing, isn't it? As well. I mean, it's something because, as you say, it's contravenes present canon law, unless he's going to change that, perhaps. But he's also weirdly this week spoken quite sort of derogatively about the ordination of women. I mean, this is the bizarre thing with Francis, is that one minute he sounds quite sort of straightforward and orthodox and Catholic, and then the next minute he says something completely heterodox, and the two don't marry up. It's kind of like Jekyll and Hyde.
But the more worrying thing about Sister Van der Leyen and the other guy,
Father Martin.
Father Martin, I say Sister Van der Leyen because she does resemble von der Leyen of EU, to me at least. And I don't remember her name. But so more concerning is the widely rumoured in the mainstream Catholic press of possibility of Archbishop Cardinal Supich being made head of the Congregation of Bishops, or for the what do you call it? Yeah, Congregation of Bishops, isn't it?
Yeah, Congregation of Bishops.
Who will have a key role in choosing bishops globally.
Now, again, this is the guy who last week or a couple of weeks ago roundly turned on the president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of America in public. well, it would just be the beginning of the end, really, wouldn't it?
It really
At least,
is.
it, at least it would get him out of your hair there in Chicago.
Well, but who will he appoint to succeed him? You know, who knows?
Well,
James
yeah.
Martin.
What's that?
James Martin. And of course, again, for those who aren't necessarily, sort of up on these things. So, Supich was. Do I need to mute you? Supich was basically a protege of Worrell and McGarrick and all that ilk. Bad news, basically. These are the cover-up bishops of America, and that would be criminal if Supich were to go there.
Oof, absolutely horrific.
And again, this would be this would be the antithesis of what Francis has declared about, a bit like Trump saying he wants to clear out the swamp. He says things like that, but then he goes and appoints,
more swamp.
Yeah, more swamp. I mean, like those bishops from South America, who were, exposed, put under scrutiny. What did Francis do? He air flies them out of South America, gives them curial positions at the Vatican, while they're being investigated, and for really quite serious charges. One of them, I think, was it Malagiaga or something, who was accused of abusing seminarians, and Francis appointed him to some cushy post in the Vatican, which is hardly doing what he said he was going to do, which was kick them all out and blah blah blah.
Well, in the interest of fairness, they did the same with Bernard Law from Boston. And that wasn't Francis. Was that JP2?
Yeah.
I think it might have been JP2 still.
Yeah, it would have been.
Yeah, but Supich would be an absolute disaster. And globally. He's a disaster here in the States. He's had witch hunts against traditional priests here in the archdiocese and seminaries. In his previous diocese, he locked the doors of the church where the traditional mass was.
That's right.
And refused them entry, and they had mass on the steps.
Yeah.
He's actively, not perhaps promoted, but spoken on positively on LGBTQ issues. He has advocated in a soft, subtle way for contraception, and also stated that politicians' views on abortion would not be a bar to Holy Communion, and that also that the priest shouldn't speak out openly on abortion because there are other social issues. He's absolutely horrific. He can't even read a goodnight story to a child correctly.
Yeah.
If we've all seen that clip.
Yeah.
I don't know. Bad news if it happens, but I suspect this is one of the things which they do is they float this idea to see what the reaction will be, and they'll make the decision based on the reaction. So, we'll see what they come up with. If they...
I would suspect that Supich wouldn't have enough of an international, outside of English-speaking Catholicism. Supich
right,
is not well known.
Yeah, I would think so.
He's never had that kind of international level of exposure.
It is interesting though that I think I'm right in saying that he was Francis's first appointment here in the United States,
Right.
which really is a begin as you mean to go on statement. But we'll see. I know Father Tom's a big fan. I don't think he can hear us at all, can he? There's no reaction. Lift your hand up.
What did you say? You're cutting out.
I said, I know you're a big fan of Carlos.
No, you're.
You'll be sorry to see him go, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. It'll be the worst day of my life if he leaves Chicago. I don't know what I'll do with myself.
Anyway.
Yeah.
My signal keeps dropping, so I don't know what's going on my end, guys. I apologize if I cut out.
It's the extreme cold. The Wi-Fi is freezing.
No, I think a squirrel hit a transmitter.
That's a brave squirrel if it's out in that temperature.
I tell you, for viewers who are not...
It's a cook squirrel now.
For viewers who are not in the Midwest, it is extremely cold here now. I woke up this morning and it was minus 14 degrees Celsius.
Whoa.
And this is just the beginning. It's to get worse. I think Sunday into Monday, I think we'll have a daytime high of minus 18. So Celsius.
Wow.
So it's going to be pretty brutal the next couple of days. In fact, actually, they're predicting 2 weeks of this cold snow.
Well, we're predicting snow here, actually.
I know, my brother was telling
tomorrow
me,
Monday.
He's going out to buy the kids a little sleigh thing.
I've got to hunt through my study to try and find my my wire mesh things that go on the soles of my shoes.
Oh, right.
Because I
just
do live
slip and slide like everybody else.
No, because I do live. It's quite a steep hill that I live on the top of, so and because it's a back street, it doesn't get the grit. It doesn't get gritted. So yeah, I'll have to look for those later.
If you can find them, will you promise you'll have a friend stand at the top and video it?
I'll just put my cloak on and slide down the hill. I'll just put my thick woolen cloak on, sit down on the floor, gather myself up, and hoist myself off the hill. Yeah. Dear. Yeah. So yes. Now that's another thing. Or dare I? What's the time? Oh, well, I've started now, I suppose.
I've started, so I'll finish.
Yeah, actually, no, I won't.
I'm intrigued
no, I won't.
Now.
I won't go there. I might save that for the post-show chat.
Okay.
Might save that for the post-show chat. Yeah. Of course, the one of the issues for us this week has been a Methodist converting to Anglicanism curate of the Church of England in London, who described the national appreciation for the passing of our beloved Captain Tom, saviour of the NHS, as an expression of white nationalist supremacism.
Yeah, I read that, and now the reaction was negative towards him, and rightly so. However, I thought the church could have been a bit more decisive on it, or taken, it was a little, although it condemned what he said, it was a little mealy-mouthed. It was, I don't know. I thought it could have been stronger.
I mean, I will say that he certainly doesn't deserves the wrong word, I think, in this case, because he did really basically bring it on himself. But there's all sorts of racism and homophobia that's been levelled at him, which I think is quite wrong.
So yes, that's what I mean. You know, they did say, instead of just condemning it and closing that statement, this is terrible what he said, they had to pepper it with that. They should have been two different issues. They should have condemned what he said, end of story, and issued a second statement condemning what happened to him. What they did is try to equate the two, which I thought was terrible, and made it look like it was excused. Well, you know, he said this, but he really said this because he knew it was good. You know, look what was coming. He's right, really, in a way, and that's not the case, you know. And I thought he was subjected to horrible attacks, but I think they're two separate issues. And you know, to really say that it was white colonialism, you know, he was out there fighting the Nazis, for God's sake. He was fighting fascism and discrimination and racism.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
This is sadly what wokeism is.
I mean, I remember in the 90s we used to talk about PC gone mad, but it's wokeism gone mad. It's who knows what will happen next? I don't know what the next level is. But and you know, to sort of, it was really the only negative blight on the whole Captain Sir Tom thing passing. Although I do believe there was somebody asked a Sinn Féin councillor in the north of Ireland, would you be out clapping for us? And he said no, or no comment. But that's not half as bad as what this minister said.
No, quite.
You know, no comment and leave it. Okay, you have a problem with the British Army, there's history there. And he didn't say anything nasty or negative towards the man. He just said no comment. And very different from what this man said. And it sort of leaves a taint on it, you know. And why are we talking about this rather than the achievements of the gentleman, you know? It's quite sad. It's quite sad.
Well, and actually the whole thing has been slightly tainted. I mean, it was slightly tainted beforehand because, you know, there's a photograph, you know, there's the whole business of him going out to Barbados when everyone was supposed to be in lockdown.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, he went to Barbados over Christmas, and there's a photograph of him with Cliff Richard and Russ Abbott. Now there's a name from the past, but the two of them standing in close proximity to him, who is sitting in front of them. None of them wearing masks. None of them clearly, social distancing. And, you know, taken at a time when, you know, people were supposed to be restricting their movements and their company, etc. And then, of course, you know, I sort of guessed that the reason why his family were permitted to be with him was because he was dying. But, you know, there are thousands of people in this country who have not been allowed to be with their loved ones as they've been dying. Now, it's interesting that there hasn't been more of a backlash about that. It says, I think, something about the affection for Captain Tom himself, that people, you know, haven't gone there, as it were. But certainly, I mean, you know, if he had not died as quickly, I suspect that there would have been a lot of people raising questions about that and asking, you know, as special as he was, why was such an exemption made? when so many have had to go through the trauma of losing loved ones without being allowed anywhere near them.
Yeah, I had no idea about that. I hadn't read that.
Yeah, so that was the kind of the situation immediately before his death, and then he dies, and then you have this controversy afterwards. So the whole thing's been a bit sort of tainted, really, which is a shame.
Yeah, it is a shame, because the central message of it was one of hope, and the little man could do something, and be effective, and rally the nation in a time of despair. All of that, which was wonderful. But yeah, oh dear. Well,
still, there we are. It is what it is.
No good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah. Yeah, and then of course there's been talk, particularly about the future of the Church of England, and great speculation generally, actually, about post-pandemic will, how many of the faithful will return.
Are there enough people in the Church of England to talk about the future?
Well, I mean,
that was meant in a very nice way.
Well, but I remember, a decade ago, people predicting the end of the Church of England last year.
Yeah.
Strangely enough, interesting. But there's all sorts of discussion about that, and the fact that people have got so used to everything being online that they'll just stick with being online, and that they won't come back in person. There's discussion.
Nonsense. I think that's nonsense.
I think people will come back.
People want fellowship. People want to corporately worship. And if you have any sort of a Eucharistic theology, you need to be there in person. And as regards the Church of England, far be it for me to speak, and this could be for any church, including the modern Roman Catholic Church, it won't be the people leaving that will kill the church. The church itself will committee itself to death. There'll be a committee for this. There'll be a committee for that. There'll be a special.
Well, all this week, there's been a flurry of job advertisements for various Church of England dioceses. For all kinds of middle management positions of archdeacon for focal ministry and
focal ministry?
Focal ministry.
What does that mean?
I don't know. Nobody knows. and various other similar sounding titles and positions with salaries of far above, shall we say, those of your average vicar. And people are that's obviously saying, well, hold on a minute. So on the one hand, you're talking about cutting full-time stipendiary parish posts, but you're advertising for middle and senior management positions that with titles that don't mean anything, and for ridiculous sums of money.
Yeah. That'll do it.
Crazy. Crazy. And then so you've got all that going on, and then you've got other people, of course, whittling on about 3 days of darkness and stuff. There's again, people running away with private revelation at the expense of the gospel.
Do they have an archdeacon for the 3 days of darkness? At 85,000 a year.
I don't think the Church of England's taken up on that one yet, but
no. They certainly will live it.
They'll certainly experience it.
Yeah, the 30 years of darkness.
But but I suppose it's the times that we're in that what is the old maxim, the devil makes work for idle hands.
I mean, there's this phenomenon which we study in philosophy called, and theology too, I suppose, but millenarianism. There's this heightened sense of the turn of a millennium, that the end times are coming. This is going to usher in the end times. And I think we're still close enough to the beginning of this millennium that can manifest. And you throw in a pandemic, a plague, a good old, bit of disaster, and it gives rise to all of this. I'm talking about the 3 days of darkness stuff, not so much the focal ministers. But
I don't know.
Anyway, I think you just have to, you just, as the old adage, stick to the facts, just the facts, man, just the facts.
Yeah.
And if you return to what the Lord told us not to worry about these things.
Exactly.
It's the thief of the night.
Exactly. Stick to the gospel. The only thing anybody at any time ever needs to worry about is being in a state of grace. As long as you're in a state of grace, whatever happens will happen, and as long as you're in a state of grace when it happens, you're sweet.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what happens, as long as you're in a state of grace when it happens. That's all you've got to be worried about.
Yeah, be it bus bomb or antichrist, you're fine.
Yeah. Yeah. What have you got to worry about?
Exactly.
If
and again,
and
always harping on about that should give you hope, and that should not make you
exactly.
worry. There's no worry with that.
No.
So you're not constantly tearing your hair out about when's these 3 days coming, and are there signs, and could this be, and
have I got enough beeswax candles?
Yes, I can. I'm sort of hearing the Reverend Dr. Ian Paisley in the back of my head, but
oh dear.
I know, but
situation.
It's not the beeswax candles that will save you.
Well,
I remember walking through Belfast City Centre when we used to go to choir school on Saturday mornings, and so I had to go through the city centre. He'd be out there with the loud hailer in front of City Hall, and he said, "It won't be the statues that will save you. It won't be the confessionals that will save you. It won't be the rattle of the rosary beads that will save you. It'll be belief on our Lord Jesus Christ." Sorry, hymn 156, please. And he'd go on and sing a hymn. But it won't be the beeswax candles that will save you. It'll be the fact that you've maintained a state of grace that will save you.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if you're not in a state of grace, if your heart and your mind and your intention has been to be in a state of grace, you'll be fine. Yeah. It's actually very easy to be saved. I mean, that's the beauty of the gospel. Yeah. And God is fair, and He's just, and He doesn't alter, He doesn't move. Like I've said many times before, He doesn't move the goalposts of salvation.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is about being in a state of grace with God, being reconciled with Him. That's all that matters. All the rest of it really doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't. And I'm always conscious on these shows, and this is the nature of the show. We talk about all these controversies and things that are happening and what have you. But, we as Catholics are people of hope. And with hope comes, we shouldn't be carefree. We need to take care of what we do. But, that we need not worry. Be not afraid. And that takes a lot of weight off our shoulders. Pray for the world. Be concerned about the world. But be not afraid, because it is all in God's plan. And it is a covenant. And as long as you keep up your end of the bargain,
exactly,
God will keep up His. And it's as simple as that. As you say, it's easy to be saved. It really is that simple. The rest are add-ons, and they're very interesting. and in a certain sense they are necessary to guide people towards a true belief and acceptance and a praxis of life, and towards the sacraments and the availability of the sacraments and the proper disposition to receive them. All of that is very important, and that's why we're concerned when people are tinkering with them and doing all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, we've been assured, and we've entered into that agreement through our baptism. We keep up our end of the bargain. You can be assured. I mean, it would be contrary to God's nature to go against keeping up. I mean, he literally can't go against it.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Be of cheer heart, light of heart, and sincere in your life, and it'll be an easy life. It'll be in some sense carefree. Even though these things are happening around us, we know, as I said, by bus, bomb, or antichrist, if we're in a state of grace, we're fine.
Yeah. Noli timere, be not afraid. 365 times in the scriptures that phrase appears. One for every day of the year. Be not afraid. That's all you've got to remember.
I didn't know that factoid. That's very interesting.
Yeah. And we'll leave on that positive note.
Yes.
For once. we'll quit while we're good. Cool. So next week, of course, we'll be back. Bless you all, and thank you all for watching. And Bishop Kelly, as always, would you give us your blessing?
Yes, the Lord be with you.
And with thy spirit.
And may the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit descend upon you and remain with you forever. Amen.
Amen. Bless you. Next broadcast on this channel will be Mass tomorrow, 8:30 GMT London time, the traditional Latin Mass for Sexagesima Sunday, followed later, of course, by the midday Angelus and the evening Angelus at 6 p.m, followed by recitation of the Most Holy Rosary of the Blessed Virgin Mary as usual. So do join us for that. If you enjoyed the show, we were Old Romans Unscripted. If you didn't, we were something else. And it's goodbye from me and a goodbye from him. And until next time, we'll see you soon. Take care. God bless all of you.
Bye.
Old Roman TV needs your help. So that as many people as possible can find us. We need you to share, like, tweet, and emote every episode you watch. We need everybody to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that we can monetize it.
Subscribing to the ORTV YouTube channel means you can re-watch your favorite or missed episodes whenever you like.
But to really help us, we need regular financial support to enable us both to sustain and to improve our programs.
Becoming a patron means not just receiving great merch, but also other privileged benefits like advanced viewings, premieres, sponsor surveys, unique interviews, and many other benefits, including a regular Mass intention.
Old Roman TV. Presenting the same faith. Today. As yesterday. For tomorrow.